In modern college basketball, we've literally never had a three-peat. Well, Dan Hurley decided to stick around to see if he could rewrite the record book.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and you're joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks so much for joining us for your first listen or watch. And a reminder, you can get every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. We want to send a special shout out to all the everydayers joining us and all the great members of the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Let's get into it. We're continuing our team previews today, and you know we've got to get to the back-to-back reigning national champions, the UConn Huskies. And of course, joining us to help us do that is the great host of Locked On UConn, Mr. Mark Zanetto, who, oh, by the way, just reached 3,000 subscribers on YouTube in less than a year. Mark, welcome in. Congrats on all the success, both to the Huskies and to yourself as the show is growing, man.
No, I appreciate it, man. It's a tribute to just covering a team that just seems to get better every year. And it's a wild ride, and I'm looking forward to the season.
Honestly, well, let's get into that wild ride. Here's where we're going today. We're going to look at the biggest storylines. Obviously, can we get this three-peat for the Huskies? Dan Hurley deciding to stick around. We'll look at the personnel, including who on earth is going to join Alex Karaban in the starting lineup, because that other quartet that started last year is all gone. We'll take a look at the schedule. And, of course, we got to make some predictions on this thing. Can we actually see a three-peat in the future? So very quickly to remind you what happened last season, folks, the Huskies were 37-3 overall. That is absolutely insane. 18-2 in Big East play. The lone losses, 3 true road games at Kansas, at Seton Hall, and at Creighton. They won the Big East regular season by 4 games. Who on earth wins a regular season conference title by 4 games? Well, the UConn Huskies did it last year, then won the Big East tournament, knocking off X, St. John's, and Marquette on the way, and then, of course, won the NCAA tournament, beating Stetson, Northwestern, San Diego State, Illinois, including that insane 30-0 run, which I still dream about, Alabama, and Purdue. Mark, what a season it was. Here's the question. Can we do it all over again?
Yeah, I mean, I don't see why anyone would question it. And I think what's so interesting to me is we've seen, whether it's CBS, whether it's Fox, they've had these anonymous coaching polls. I think only like 17% of people feel like UConn is going to even make the Final Four this year. I think the thought process is, as we'll talk about it, that they lost so much, but people forget that they had a top 10 recruiting class that basically all stayed, with the exception of Steph Castle. And so those 4 guys, along with some key transfers and also another top 10 recruiting class, is back with probably arguably one of the greatest college basketball players ever in Alex Karaban, having won back-to-back national champions. Samson Johnson, a part of back-to-back championships, and Hassan Diarra, the 6th man of the year in the Big East, won back-to-back titles for us. He was more of a bench player in the 23 team, but was a key factor in the 24 season. So This team is reloaded. And to think just because we lost 4 very great and some of the best players to ever come to UConn with Klingon, Tristan Newton, Steph Castle, and Cam Spencer is I think it's folly. And also, we didn't even talk about it's Dan Hurley. Forget about the players right now. Like Dan Hurley's coaching acumen. I think the gap that he's created between him and the rest of the country is a chasm.
Yeah, and I think that's a massive point, Mark, is college basketball. Yes, it's about the players and the guys out there doing it. But how often do we say, let's just use a different school so that we're not having to use UConn for it. But like, how often will we say, I don't know about this Kansas roster, but it's Bill Self, so they're a top 10 team. I think we've got to be to that point now with Dan Hurley, where he's going to get the benefit of the doubt annually. And there's no reason to think otherwise until there's, a 5-year run where he doesn't, and we're not going to get that. That's just not going to happen because he's so good. And oh, by the way, let's look at a couple guys helping him do it in his key assistant coaches, Mr. Murray and Kamani Young, who just
Correct.
knock it out of the park. So I love that it's not just the Hurley show. It's these other guys lining it up with them and making it rock. And so we look at the history of this thing. I said it in the cold open. There has never been a modern three-peat. Heck, I mean, just doing it twice, Mark, is wild. Literally only 2 others in the modern era. Florida most recently 06-07, Duke in 91-92. That's it, going back to 1985, which is when the expanded tournaments start. To get to 3 straight championships, you got to go back to UCLA's insane run from 67 to 73. But there were only like 67, 23,
right,
and you only had to win 4 games. Even recently as 73, 25 teams, and you only had to win 4 games. Still a wild thing for those wooden teams to do that, but nobody has accomplished this. So, and then the other side of it is, I went back, Mark, and looked. What did Duke do that third year? What did Florida do? Duke in 93 went 24-8. They were 10-6 in ACC play, lost their first ACC tournament game, and then lost to Cal in the second round. Florida that next year, where the guys had all decided to come back for the 07 championship and then left. Mm-hmm. And then the next year they went 24-12, 8-8 in the SEC, lost their first SEC tournament game, and made the NIT. So, Mark, what is it that makes this UConn squad different than either that Duke or Florida team trying to three-peat?
Yeah, I mean, I think we kind of talked a little bit about it with the coaching staff. I would direct anybody that loves college basketball, that is a big fan of when coaches get interviewed in a very intimate setting. Graham Bensinger did this in full access with Dan Hurley, where he talked about their practices, and he asked about the Lakers stuff, like, why didn't you go to the Lakers? And this is a huge point, which is he talked about how his coaching style, like, it gives them such an advantage over the rest of college basketball. And he feels like that's where he excels the most. And he felt like he couldn't do that in the NBA. Like, he's like, what am I going to do? Tell Anthony Davis to run stairs or LeBron James to do, XYZ? Like, his intensity, his kind of always being, to use a phrase that we use all the time at this network, locked on. Like, he's so locked on with what they're doing. I mean, there are videos where he's literally telling the manager who has the ball in his hands, he's like, come on, wake up, give me the ball. Like, he's so insane when it comes to that stuff. Some kids aren't going to be able to handle that. So he tries to find players. He was talked about it, old school souls to come in and really handle the way he controls practice, the way he controls the environment. And then let's just be honest, guys, like he develops players. He brings in guys who are elite talent, or he finds players like a Tristan Newton who fit in his system and develops them into, if you're a fan in North Carolina, that he played at East Carolina. I don't think anyone that watched him at ECU was like, oh, he's going to be an NBA player. But Dan Hurley and his staff looked at him and said, he's a perfect complement for what we're trying to do in this Luke Murray-led offensive system. And that's why I think that there's so much to it. But the bottom line is, great players make great coaches look good. And it's just that kind of blend of it all. They feel like they have a formula, and it's just, at this point, it's just a machine, and they're just continuing to want everything. Just got a great recruit, another 5-star recruit yesterday, Darius Adams. So it's not stopping anytime soon. Like, the media availability that I laughed a lot about yesterday it was day 1 official for practice. Dan Hurley said, this isn't day 1 for us. This is day 117.
That's right.
And so that's his mentality. And I think that's the difference that UConn has.
And what I love is that it doesn't seem to matter. Like, guys are going to come in and they're going to do it. Because the same thing you said with Tristan Newton, I kind of felt that way about Cam Spencer as well. It's like, Cam Spencer's a great player, but dude, it was different level stratosphere last year what Cam Spencer did. And so I'm so glad you brought that up, Mark, with Tristan Newton, and then now thinking about Cam Spencer, because I've been trying to think, and I'd love to get your take on this. Who is this year's version of that? Who is Cam Spencer? Both in terms of like just blowing up maybe a little unexpectedly, but also I love Cam Spencer's edge he plays with, just like, you're a little unhinged. Are you crazy? But I think it's really good and helpful to the team. Like, do you have a sense of who that might be this year?
I don't think we particularly have that one guy, but I will tell you who, and it's the reason why I have him in my starting lineup. I don't want to spoil any of the segments ahead, but I think Solo Ball is going to take a major leap. He's a guy who, against your Tar Heels in Madison Square Garden, scored 14 points off the bench when we had a little foul trouble, and he Dan Hurley has talked about this. It was hard for him to understand initially, like, why he wasn't getting playing time. But when you look back at a 37-3 national championship team, it's one of the most efficient offenses, if not the most efficient offenses in 25 years. So where were his minutes? Like, he couldn't crack the lineup, not because he wasn't good or because he couldn't shoot or wasn't the type of player they were looking for. But now it's his time. And don't be fooled with Aiden Mahaney being transferred in. Aiden Mahaney is another player that I feel like can fit that Cam Spencer mold. Maybe not in the psycho, attitude, but in the type of play. He's a combo guard. He can handle it with both sides. He's tougher than most people think. He's already played in a Randy Bennett offense that's very methodical. Yes, so he is definitely the type of player that I think is going to fit that mold. But Solo, to me, and this is my favorite little nugget with Solo, when he was in high school, he was 5'5" as a sophomore. Jeez. And he still was a monster on the court. And he had a huge growth spurt. The comp for him is he's 6'4", but he still plays like he's 5'5". He has that edge where he's just like, I'm this little guy on the court and I'm taking it to you. And he's also got the wingspan of a 6'10" player. The type of freak athlete that Solomon Ball is, I don't think people are going to understand it until they see it. And I'm really excited about his growth in this season.
And Mark, I'm personally very upset at God that he did not do the same thing for me that he did for Solo Ball, because I'm sitting here at 5'11", just wishing I could have that 6 in front of my height. Oh man, okay, it's going to be very exciting to see these guys. We want to talk more about Solomon Ball. We want to talk more about Alex Karaban, the lone remaining starter. Who's going to join him on the court and in the starting lineup? We're going to get to all of that and more about the personnel coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about Game Time, going to live events is the absolute best, and we are now just under 5 weeks away from the tip-off of the college basketball season, and I know Mark is, and I know I am looking forward to making all sorts of new memories this college season. Well, great news. When you're getting tickets for this upcoming college basketball season, Game Time has a new feature. It's called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. What Picks does is filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through all the tickets that are out there. Whether it's Game Time ticket coverage, the lowest price guarantee, or the panoramic views from your seat in the app, Game Time has got you covered. I've got Game Time's website pulled up right now. I'm looking at tickets for UConn's season kickoff against Sacred Heart. We've got some lower level tickets, Section 12, row S, for $40 each, Mark. That's a great deal. So, folks, if you want to get in on that, see the kickoff to the season of the back-to-back reigning national champs, hop on Game Time and go find a deal great like that. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Terms apply. Download the Game Time app today. What time is it? It's game time. Isaac Shade, Mark Zanetto with you today. We're talking UConn Huskies, getting you ready for what's going to happen for Dan Hurley's team. And man, what a joy it is that he decided to come back or to stay and not head out west, as you touched on a little bit earlier, Mark. And also great news is Alex Karaban stuck around as well, pulling out just right there close to the deadline. But Mark, the other 4 starters are gone from this team. That's 4 of your top 5 scorers from last year, but 6 scores 6, 7, 8, and 9 all return in Hassan Diarra, Samson Johnson, Solo Ball, who we talked about, and Jalen Stewart. What I'm trying to figure out, Mark, before we talk about starting lineup and the rotation and all of that, is there any sort of world in which Alex Karaban is not the best player on this team?
You know what? Best or most impactful? I think that would be. I think he's the most impactful player because he does so much, and the leadership that he provides. They put so much on his plate. I think of him, to use a football analogy, he's like the starting center of like a Super Bowl team, like a Jason Kelsey would be like come to mind, or a Jeff Saturday or something like that. So for Alex Karaban, he's like the quarterback of this offense, or whatever euphemism you want to use. He puts people in the right places. He's one of the best screeners that you'll ever see. He slips better than anybody in college basketball. If the Purdue fans are watching, I apologize, but one of my favorite plays from the national championship game is when he set a back screen on Zach Edey and slipped to the basket for an easy backdoor when they kind of did some crazy motion. But he did that so many times. He's also one of the best players to kind of get out on the floor in a great finisher at the rim. So to me, I don't know if you can call him the best player. I think he's our most important player. I think what's so crazy is that because this team is super talented, we don't know who their best player may be. That could be on a Jalen Stewart, who's popped multiple times, and most notably in the Big East title game against Marquette. They feel like, he's got some first round buzz. You have a 5-star in Liam McNeely, who could be the best player on this team. A way I actually feel like Steph Castle was probably the best player, but wasn't the most impactful player on UConn's team last year.
Yep.
It's hard to say. I mean, Hassan Diarra, I think, is going to make a huge jump. He averaged 6 points and like 3 assists last year. I think he's going to double that. He's going to be a 12-6 guy because of the minutes increase and the amount of shooters that we have. And what's crazy to me, Isaac, is I heard this yesterday from Dan Hurley's mouth. I watched the YouTube media availability. He said that what you know about Samson Johnson is great energy guy, rim runner, shot blocker. Majority of his shots were dunks last year, right? Huge, great field goal percentage. He said they're toying with the idea of creating a system where Samson is playing an Oso Iguodala role, where he's actually initiating offense in pick and roll and dribble handoffs and devising that type of system. If he's capable of that and he has that ability, then this team goes into another stratosphere, because then what's the spacing look like? You have 4 other guys on the floor who all are 40% 3-point shooters, with Alex Karaban, Jalen Stewart, Aiden Mahaney, Solo Ball, whoever else you want to mention, Liam McNeely. And then what do other teams do? If that's what Samson can be eventually towards the end of the season or at the beginning, however they do it, that's insane. And we haven't even talked about Terrace Reed or some of the other bigs that they have in this team. So I got insanely excited last night watching that clip, because if that's what they're doing, then the joke's on the rest of the college basketball, because Dan Hurley is kind of keeping that stuff on the back burner and then unleashing it on teams. So whether that comes to fruition, we'll find out. But that's just another nugget that I thought I'd throw out there.
Man, that is a great nugget, Mark. Thank you for sharing that. So, folks, let me centralize this, because we've said a bunch of the names. Let me just remind us of, yes, there is quite a bit going out, but you do have quite a bit staying from this national championship roster. Samson Johnson, Alex Karaban, Hassan Diarra, Yusuf Singar, Jalen Stewart, Solomon Ball, Jaden Ross. I mean, like, all these guys coming back. Plus, as Mark said, you add in Terrace Reed Jr. coming over from Michigan, a nice big support what Samson Johnson is going to be doing. Aiden Mahaney coming over from St. Mary's out on the West Coast, where if you're not a night owl like I am and stay up watching this dude, yeah, a little bit of a sophomore slump, but just a phenomenal basketball player, going to be a great piece for this backcourt. And then several freshmen coming in, headlined by Liam McNeely, of course, but also Isaiah Abraham, Ahmed Noel. So UConn just keeping this thing going. So, Mark, all of that said, I mean, with the depth, I think it's legitimately hard to pick out who the starting 5 is for this crew. And I think that is actually a good thing. Sometimes it's like, oh, there's your obvious starting 5. I like that there's this level of depth and competition, where I struggled a little bit to come up with my starting 5. But I want to know, my man, what yours is, because you're the one watching this team day in and day out.
Yeah, I think the two questions that it's a great point, Isaac. But the 2 questions I had initially was, are they going to stay loyal and true to Samson and Hassan? Are those guys safe? And I feel like the answer to that question is yes, because I think, number one, they've proven it so far through the offseason from what I've heard, and also because of some of the extra things that they're trying to do with those players. Hassan Diarra is going to start. Samson's going to start. Alex Karaban is going to start, obviously. And then the other 2 are kind of just, these are the question marks for me. I have Solo Ball as my starter, because he's been the talk of camp, to use a football term. They're in preseason mode, right? Where he's been kind of dominant in practice. Some really interesting ones are whether Jalen Stewart or Liam McNeely is going to get that nod. I feel like they're going to go with Jay Stu. listen, if it's equal, he's going to go with who's been
The
there.
returner. That's right.
And I think unless Liam is just absolutely just exposing this team, which isn't happening, he's been great. Every clip you see, Liam McNeely's making a three somewhere, so he's going to get plenty of playing time. And the wings are going to be interchangeable. The buzzword that Dan Hurley uses every time, I think I've said this 1,000 times in my podcast, positional versatility. They want to play positionless basketball. So don't even worry about the 5-4-3-2-1. It's basically just the players that he feels are going to give him the best chance to win. And honestly, that could mean at some point you see some crazy lineups where Alex Karaban's playing the 5 and they just have shooters everywhere. I think that's also going to be in the mix, a la the Golden State Warriors kind of lineup of death. So that's kind of where I think this team is going. But I'm going to give the edge to Solo at the 2 and Jay Stu at the 3. That's my starting 5.
I like it. And Mark, very well explained as well. And I think that's part of like that loyalty to the returners when it makes sense to do so is not shocking at all, given the things we hear from Dan Hurley all the time, like of the program he's trying to build in an era where people are creating new team year after year after year. That's not what Dan Hurley's doing. He's saying we're building a program. You get to come be part of it or not. It's up to you. And I love that. Mark, I was very similar, except that, I know we're, as you said, positionless stuff, but kind of at my 2 and 3, I did gave Aiden Mahaney the nod there at the 2. I think just that backcourt of he and Diarra together makes a ton of sense. But again, as you're saying, like I don't think it's ultimately going to matter who it is, right?
And Isaac, I'll be honest with you, man. Like I did a show where I did the top 10 basketball players in college basketball. And I said my sleeper of that could be an Aiden Mahaney. He's a 1,000-point scorer in 2 years in the WCC, and he's only played exceptional against better competition. So if you put him now in the Big East, who's to say he doesn't pop? And now he's the 15, 16-point scorer that they had with Tristan Newton or Cam Spencer. That's very possible.
100%, especially with him having, all due respect to Coach Bennett and St. Mary's, with having much better talent around him now.
Exactly.
How does that unlock his game? I'm curious to see that. And then I did have Liam McNeely in my starting lineup, but I hear every argument you're making in the other direction. And so what's always interesting to me with talented freshmen like this is watching the progression of it throughout the season. Because, Mark, I think there's a very real world in which your lineup is obviously the night one lineup. And then we've got to watch both the closing lineups and how things progress throughout the season. So
totally.
I love that we're a little bit differentiated there, and that makes a ton of sense to me. Very quickly, before we switch to looking at the schedule, how then do you think the depth rotation looks coming off the bench after that starting 5?
Yeah, I'm as curious as anyone, because to me, I think, and this is God, I don't even do this anymore. I think with other teams, if I've covered other teams, I'd be like, well, if it was me, I would do this. I don't even want to do that because UConn fans would be like, you're not Dan Hurley, so shut up. So for me, it's more just like what I try to put myself in his mindset. And I think what he's going to be doing as we're kind of transitioning to looking at that schedule is with the bye games and with some of the early games before they get to Maui, I think he's going to try a bunch of different rotations. I think you're going to see a myriad of looks. I think you're going to see Liam at the 2 sometimes. I think you're going to see Aiden at the point sometimes. I think you're going to see Solo at the point sometimes. I think you're going to see Hassan Diarra and Ahmad Noel at sometimes in the same backcourt. So it's just they're gonna come at you in waves initially, and he's gonna basically say, okay, this is the Hunger Games. Who's gonna come out on top? And that's really what this first 6 games or 7 games of the season is really gonna show. Is that, because I'll tell you, from the open practice, the guy who popped is the guy who we thought was the 11th guy on the team, Isaiah Abraham. Like, he was dunking on people and plus shooter from 3, and Dan Hurley specifically said, when we get guys in here, we kind of know who they are. And Isaiah has shown us that we didn't know exactly who he was, that he was a lot better offensively. So that's a guy who I love. He's 6'8". He can guard anybody. And if he can step out and shoot threes and be athletic, I think that's another just wing. And I think that's the thing is, like, I don't really think they're worried about. I think they may just throw a bunch of 6'8" guys out there and just say, okay, guard us.
Go.
So yeah, it could be a myriad of things. I think initially he'll get down, or later in the year he's going to get down to an 8 or 9 man rotation. But I don't think I think it's gonna be hard to not play some of these guys. Like Jaden Ross is a guy who he loves. He talks about him all the time, but didn't play a lot last year. And where's his minutes? So it's one of those things where I think it's just going to figure it out in the early part and let practice and competition dictate.
Yeah, that's a good word. And also great injury insurance, knowing that you've got all these guys if you have to turn to them. I'm knocking on all the wood, Mark. I don't want to be jinxing your squad, but there we go.
You're not the only one. I've heard that too. It's like, well, we've escaped the injury bug for 2 years, so now it's definitely going to hit us. Like, that's the New England people talking. So for sure.
We all are doomsday foreseers. All right, guys, we got to turn to the schedule next. The non-con, man, it's got 2 separate 3-game stretches that are going to be insanely fun, and I can't wait to watch. How is UConn going to navigate it all? We'll get to that in just a second. Right after I tell you about FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel. It's America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets, and that's guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. How about this, Mark? FanDuel's got those Big East regular season odds up and ready to go. You guessed it, #1, of course, is the UConn Huskies at +125, followed by Creighton at +380, then St. John's at +550, Marquette +600, the X at +700, and then it drops off a cliff down to Nova at +3,000. So if you want to get in on those Big East odds or maybe some other conference regular season odds, go on over to FanDuel.com to check it out. It's America's #1 sportsbook. We're talking UConn Huskies today on the show, and now it's time to turn our attention to the schedule. As a reminder, the Big East has a 20-game conference slate. You get 31 regular season games, so we got 11 in the non-con. As per usual, we're not going to really pay much attention to the bye games because they're bye games, and UConn should take care of those with relative ease. But there are 6 games that really stand out in this non-con slate, Mark. Obviously, as you alluded to earlier, the Huskies will be in Maui this year, which is last year's Maui field was insane. This year's is right up there with it. The Huskies starting with Memphis, and then we'll play the winner of Colorado, Michigan State, and then move on the other side of the bracket. They will either face North Carolina, Iowa State, Auburn, or Dayton. Mark, what I want to ask you about before even the games is we haven't really dived in much into the Dan Hurley state of it all. But I'm even just thinking, like, as we start thinking about this schedule, how differently would you feel about this team heading out to Maui with someone not named Dan Hurley as the head coach?
It would just kind of change the entire tenor of the program if he was gone, because you have to think, even if they retain, let's say, because what I heard was that if he did go, then Kamani would be the successor. But Luke would probably go with Dan. So you kind of lose a big chunk of the triumvirate. And then you have to throw Tom Moore in there. I mean, Tom Moore has won national championships with Jim Calhoun and Dan Hurley. And Tom, by the way, if you ever can get Tom Moore on your college basketball show, get him, because he is a phenomenal guest, and he's just a wonderful college basketball aficionado. He's done it all, mid-major to high major. He's fantastic. But yeah, I think it would be we'd be remiss to say that it would be it would be a sad trip to Hawaii, and it's very rare that would be the case.
Oh, man. And it's so good that we get this back at the Lahaina Civic Center this year. So glad that Maui community is starting to rebuild there in Lahaina. And so, Mark, as you look at this tournament, what is it going to do? There are 1, 2, 3, 4 bye games before that. What is this tournament specifically, though, in your opinion, going to do to really help see what we have with this UConn team?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the same thing we talked about earlier, which is they're going to see, who is ready for this tournament play. Because even though you get to play, no matter whether you win or lose, I know Dan Hurley's mindset, which is like, survive and advance, like one game at a time. I guarantee you they're going to have a picture of the Hawaii championship trophy somewhere, and they're going to bring it with them and put it in place in practice. And that's the first championship they want to win. So they want to win that. They want to win every championship possible. That's Dan Hurley's. He literally has a shirt that says everything. Like it's not just we just want to win the Big East, or hey, we want to get to the Final Four. Like it's one after the other. So this is the first one, and this group hasn't done anything like that yet. So like that's another kind of predictor. I think you're going to see a lot of different lineups in this. I think what the interesting thing is, I think they have a favorable matchup initially with Memphis.
Sure.
Colorado, Michigan State would be interesting because, I mean, if it's Izzo, and Colorado's no slouch, they were in the NCAA tournament last year, a really good offensive team. I just think the field is loaded. So no matter who we play, it's going to be a good test. I think it's going to be a good test, especially to the players that haven't seen the game action that they have been clamoring for. And I think it's going to be a really a good precursor to some of the more interesting stuff down the schedule, which is the Big East tournament.
And in particular, that third game, whether it's, all due respect to Dayton, I'm hoping that it's either Auburn, Iowa State, or North Carolina, because any of those three matchups would be absolutely electric. And I can't wait to see that. Now, what's interesting, Mark, is coming home from Maui, man, that trip, I made that trip there and back this summer, and it kills you coming back east on the way home. 3 days later, host Maryland Eastern Shore. So a nice, nice drink of water to get back right on the East Coast. But then wrapping up the non-con slate, hosting Baylor in the Big East Big 12 Championship on December 4th, then going to Texas on Sunday, December 8th, and wrapping up the non-con slate at MSG, the world's most famous arena in the Hall of Fame series, against the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Man, what a great, that's 6 of your last 7 non-con games is Maui and then those 3. What a fun way to wrap up the non-con slate. What are you looking forward to in those 3 games, Mark?
I am looking forward to how they play their first, because I'm a big, I know we don't see a lot of these. I'm a big true road game guy. And so last year when we played at Kansas, we had a gimpy, I don't think we had Stephon Castle wasn't available.
That's right.
We had a gimpy Cam Spencer. And so we went into that game, no excuses. Kansas shot better than they probably shot all year, lost that game, but they were down, almost 20 points at one point in the game and actually battled back and had a chance to win it. So that showed me a lot about what that team was like. And I think when they play at Texas, hostile environment against a solid Big 12 school.
SEC now.
Oh, that's right. See?
Wild.
Caught me.
Here's the funny thing, Mark. Literally, I had it on the tip of my tongue because I was like, SEC, Texas, SEC. So
no, you're right. It's so wild. Obviously we're in football season, so I should know that. But yeah, exactly. I think with playing an SEC Texas, I just think those road games are such good indicators. Listen, I love when we play at the Garden. I love when you obviously play at home again in Gamble or the XL Center, but there's something about how your team reacts to a out of conference road game on someone's campus. Where it feels like the entire student body's on top of you, and I think that'll be telling. That's what I'm looking forward to.
Man, and it's a beautiful new arena that Texas has there. That'll be a lot of fun. Legitimately, Mark, when I was putting the schedule together, I was like, back-to-back Big 12 games, Baylor and Texas.
Right.
And I was like,
right.
No, crap. It's SEC. It's so wild, y'all. This is the world we live in. And then obviously the conference slate. One of the great things about the Big East with having 11 schools is we do still get a true home and home. I love that about the Big East. As Mark was just talking, the importance of these true road games. We get 10 of those. And then you get all those schools back at home. Really interested to see what the Big East is this year, if Creighton truly is team number 2, and if St. John's takes that step up. Mark, with that in mind, let's move forward, and I would like us to each make our predictions for where UConn will finish in the Big East, and then also the regular season conference record, regular season record in totality for those 31 games.
Sure. I think they're going to finish first in the Big East. I know, I'm obviously a homer, but I just don't think you can bet against them. I mean, they're the odds-on favorite. You went over the betting odds. They're plus 125. I think the next one is plus 380 or something like that with Creighton. So shout out to FanDuel. But yeah, I think that's the smart money. I think they're going to be 17-3 in conference. I think one less win than last year. I think just based off of just odds, right? I think, I don't think they're going to be as good as last year. I think they're maybe more talented, if you use Dan Hurley's words. But as far as it being an efficient offensive machine like they were last year and elite defensively, that still remains to be seen. So I think they're going to get there. I think they're going to be 17-3. I hope one of those losses isn't at Creighton this year. That's the big one that I want to take from them because they really beat us pretty bad there in Omaha. But that's where I think.
All right, that game at Creighton on Tuesday, February 11th on the back half of the slate. Mark, I'm same as you. I have them UConn number 1 in the Big East. I don't know if it'll be by 4 games again, but man, just winning that outright though, not shared. And then I'm going to go 9-2 in non-con. I think dropping a game in each of those 2-3 game sets, just from an odd standpoint, makes a lot of sense to me. And then I was just 1 game worse than you in conference play. I have it at 16-4 for a total of 25-6, which would far and away be the best of the teams, the 3 opportunities we've had in the modern era for a three-peat. Going to be a great season yet again. Mark, it has been back-to-back dominant NCAA tournament runs for this team. The only team ever to win all their games by 13 points or more in the 23 tournament. And then they upped it by a point last year, becoming the only team to win it by 14 or more. I mean, just absolutely legitimately historic runs. What's going to happen this year?
I can't bet against them. I wrote in our pregame show notes, I think the minimum is a Final Four run, but I strongly believe they're going to three-peat. And I will throw something else at you. I also think they're going to have the double-double, because I think the UConn women are going to win it all too.
Woo! That's a great prediction. I love you getting a little spice, a little cherry on top with the bonus prediction there. Let's see if that can come to fruition as well. I've got a 1 seed in the tournament. That just lines up with what we were saying about the finish and the regular season record. And then I put Final Four as mine. It's just so many variables. We talked about the injury fortunes, but I think, if you're good, like I'm talking about that as slightly falling short of a three-peat. I think we would all be gloriously overjoyed if we were to say in a span of 3 years, we had 2 national championships and a Final Four. And just with all the randomness of the NCAA tournament, who knows? So go ahead, Mark.
Let me just say one thing. If you have them in the Final Four, like if that's you or anybody else feels like they're going to be in the Final Four, when UConn makes the Final Four, they win the national championship. So if they get there, they've only lost once in the Final Four in their 7 trips. And they also didn't have one of their major players in that 2009 season. So
that's right.
If all I'm saying is if you let them get there, they're going to win it all. If someone's going to beat them, it better be in the Elite 8 or Sweet 16, because if it gets to the Final Four, Dan Hurley's not going to let this team lose.
So, Mark, are you saying I need to change my prediction to Elite 8?
I'm just telling.
Elite 8.
I'm just saying I'm just saying betting wise, 6 of 7
That's
times.
A good word. That's a good word. No.
Yeah.
I love
it. There's 6-0 in national title games. So you just can't.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Blue blood, the UConn Huskies. Don't doubt it, folks. It's true. Mark Zeno, thank you so much, brother. Folks, if you haven't yet checked it out, make sure you go listen to Locked On UConn. Mark does a great job over there. Literally starting today as we record this is going to be giving you UConn men and women's basketball stuff coming at you. And so on a extreme every day, is that the plan, Mark?
That's the plan. Every day we're going to dedicate a show each to each of these great programs. I just needed to find the bandwidth to do both, and I've got it now. So that's the deal.
I love it, man. Good on you for making it work. So look, we're looking forward to seeing if both of these teams can win national championships, as Mark predicted, and they're each going to have their own show to help figure it out. So we'll look at that. Make sure you check that all out. If you haven't subscribed to the show here on both audio and video, make sure you do that. If you haven't joined the Locked On College Basketball Discord, man, we'd love to have you. The link is in the show notes for that, and it's absolutely free to join. As always, I want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wildcats, and until tomorrow, peace.